Welcome to Puck Talk CS. It's been way too long since Steven Murno and myself, Matthew Mugno, have talked to you guys about the New York Rangers. Where we left off was a lot different than what has come in the last month, in the last few weeks. Steve and I are going to dive into everything. We love to recap, and we're going to make it as quick as possible to catch up on the last really 2 weeks of Rangers news, hockey, and everything else. It's been an absolute bombardment. All the media outlets are talking about New York for better or for worse. Steve-O, you finished finals. Very proud of you, but I think it's time for us to sink our teeth in.
Yeah, man, it's like getting one hurdle over and you get hit right with another one. But listen, I'm so glad to be back behind the mic with you. Love doing this. But how about let's start off with a positive. We don't play today, so we can't lose. We're down so bad that's where we're at. So listen, let's do it. Let's talk some puck. And what started as a rough patch has quickly snowballed into a season altering stretch. The last epi we
Yes.
did was 2 weeks ago. I mean, at this rate, the Rangers are trending towards a lottery pick rather than a team that's looking to get back to the Eastern Conference final and get over that hunch. We lost 10 of our last 13 games, and we sit 2 points ahead of the last place Columbus Blue Jackets. We are 10th in the Eastern Conference. This is rock bottom. So we'll start with your thoughts. How are you interpreting this as a fan and as somebody that has been around this team, has been in the locker room, as a reporter? What are all your thoughts given everything that's going around?
I'll be honest, and I said this as a fan when I was a silly college boy and watching the 21 team, that really the pre-COVID team, with I guess just a more keen eye on the game to the point where I was in, like you said, I covered the team for 6 months last year. I'm not surprised. None of this is really shocking to me, just based on how the locker room worked. I think what is shocking is the fallout. Uh, you know, around Thanksgiving, it was the conversation of the trade memo, and to see where we went from there to now is shocking. But Steve, this all started with that memo that said we're open to trade, and I actually don't even recall, my guy, if we talked about this. Do you remember if we talked about that at all?
I don't think we have. It's been a minute.
I don't think there's a sense in really talking about that now. Again, so many outlets are talking about the Rangers that I think it's senseless for us to like talk about the same things like we don't know, that every listener knows what's going on in Ranger land, but we also want to share our opinions. So let's start with the Captain Truba trade. Steve, I want your take overall.
My deal with Truba, and listen, you go back and I didn't think this was something that was going to get done. But looking at it, this is something that I think had to be addressed. And I think Jury did a great job with this, getting the Ducks to take on the cap and the Rangers not taking any bit of a hit. I thought it was great, and the Ducks, they're not ready to be a playoff team. They're not going to be a playoff team. Chuba's not going to get them any closer over the next year and a half. And that alone makes this a head scratcher. Not only that, but the Ducks, remaining the contract, what are they doing with this? So, what are they thinking? What's the plan here? I don't know. Who cares? But moving forward, I think this was great from jury side, but it kind of gives you the question like, Jury didn't, and we see this clearly now that Jury left a lot of these tea leaves, as you want to call them. He left a lot of these tea leaves open on the table, and he didn't address a lot of these problems. And I think, this kind of goes to the overarching, thing in Rangers land right now, where these problems that the Rangers had last year, and I think maybe last year you could call it an outlier. Last year was such an overperformance, and the Metro was so weak last year. This year, the Metro is much, much deeper, and you're seeing that the Rangers are having a much harder time copy and pasting that formula from last year and into this year. And I think Jacob Trouba, in terms of the long run, great move. It's unfortunate that we have that reputation of trading away our captains. I mean, we could stem back to the conversation of who should have got the C a couple of years ago, but there's no point in doing that. But this year is for me, and as a fan, we're fans. This was Sam's last year. He deserves so much more than he's getting right now. I feel so bad for him. These games that he has to call. I mean, he's calling, JV high school games the way we're playing right now. But I mean, great move in the long term. Short term, though, I struggle with what this team is so broken defensively right now. And I think it depends what your goal is. I'm gonna be honest with you. I am having the hardest time deciphering what the direction this front office, who's driving and where is the driver taking us right now? Because trading
Yes.
Truba away, that's more of a long-term move. But you look in the short term, defensively, we're so broken. And if you want to say, you know what, this is our last year before we blow it up, keeping Truba would have made sense. So I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so actually I want to pitch in kind of I love I love devil's advocate between you and I. And everything I've heard is that the Ducks, their room isn't great right now, and they saw an opportunity to pick up a player that was a captain in the NHL, who's physical, who plays well enough defensively and definitely above the level that their players are playing at. They have a lot of young defenders, and there are a few defensemen that can Mintyukov play 82 games in a season? And now these are questions personally, I don't watch them every night. But you look at their back end and Truba fits. It's not like it's pushing out Lane Hudson, a potential Calder defender, or like an Adam Fox in 1920, where it was like, oh, he's really good. You're pushing out a player that probably could use AHL minutes or probably could play as a seventh defenseman on an NHL roster, and one, frankly, that's in the bottom five of the league. So I see why the move is a move that's helping keep the organization kind of moving in the right direction. You pick up a leader, a physical player who can play steady NHL minutes on the back end, and it has the experience. Now, granted, from our point of view, it's a little bit different, but from their point of view, that's what they're looking at. It's the fact that they took the whole cap. That's a master move. Now, again, this goes back to the summer, and we're going to talk about kind of the tampering in a moment because Larry Brooks shed a lot of light on this, and some reports from LeBron at a TSN as well with the whole Brady Kachuk thing. We're going to get there, but with that, this all kind of started in the summer with Barkley Goodrow and how that was handled, and he had no shame. Like I never really talked to Goodrow. He was not a guy that was an open locker room guy that was always talking. He really specifically stated to San Jose reporters that he was not happy with how that was handled, which that's a statement from a player that doesn't speak a lot. On top of that, then there was the Truba situation, right? The whole trade block thing. We saw that interview with Kaplan during the Penguins game. Overall, I think it's a move right now that Chris Drury did not sign that contract. And I think he took a lot of heat for not finding a way to move it, and he found a way to move the entire cap. And what I think Jacob Trouba turns into is a defenseman that, if he plays well enough, he had a lot of interest around the league. Let's be for real. They eat half that salary and they trade him and they get some draft stock at the trade deadline. Jacob Trouba is a player that you could play at $4 million on your third pairing if you're, I don't know if he'd go back to Winnipeg. Maybe if Detroit is in the running, they're not right now. Uh, Frankly, a team, I know it's crazy. Columbus was in the conversation, and Columbus isn't playing terribly. They're towards the lower half of the Eastern Conference. Point being, there are teams that would have interest that could contend, and I think that's where he ends up. So again, I loved how you wrapped up Drew's approach to it, and obviously that led to the next move that the Rangers made in quick, almost rapid succession. It felt like one day to the next, but I want to make sure you don't have any final thoughts on Truba.
No, I agree. I agree with everything you just had to say, and I think, this kind of shifts us over to our next point, with the Rangers now declaring, this open season, before we jump into all these other issues that, we've been watching these last 10 or so games. You know, I want to get your opinion of what's your expectation of this team moving forward, because that's a lot of, I'll be honest, depending, it doesn't matter who you listen to. You want to listen to Valley, on the post games, you want to listen to, everybody covering the team. The expectation, it's my, sense that nobody knows what the direction of this team is. And even listening, to Hank and the guys, even listening to Sam in the booth, these guys don't know like what's to come of this team. I think it's very obvious, and you could sit here and point fingers here and there, but what's your expectation as we stand here on Monday, December 16th? What is your expectation for this team moving forward?
Well, something that Brian Boyle said on Up in the Blue Seats, the New York Post podcast with Brooks, Molly Walker, and Brian Boyle was interesting. He said, when they traded Callahan, it was a shock to the room, and that was at the trade deadline. But that was when the Rangers were on the come up. This was a trade of a captain while this team is on the come down in December. So I think that the whole thing is setting a strange precedent. But I also do believe that that 10-4-1 record before this complete fall off, we had a lot of questions. There were a lot of questions surrounding this team, and it started with the conference final last year. So I think the direction now moving forward, not to really look in the, you know, 2020 hindsight, I question, is it, what shoe falls first? Because frankly, even when we talk about captains being traded in retrospect, I thought McDonough was a player they could have kept, but it was almost to the point of trying to tear it all down. Like I don't think they were going to trade, a Zuccarello and some of the other players that were on the team and then keep McDonough. I felt that they sent that message out, and that would have been kind of reneging on the idea of a full rebuild, which frankly New York has never seen. But the conversation's getting interesting because the bubble teams like Ottawa, Buffalo, the Atlantic Four that never seem to get over into the playoffs or that wild card spot. The conversation now around the league is that these full rebuilds don't really work. You need veteran players. And that's where I'm confused. Are you going to hold on to players? Are you going to navigate contracts? Are you going to force players out? Because right now, the only way you can move some of these players is if you make it as uncomfortable for them to play in New York. Is it head coach situation? Is it the general manager? There's reasons where I could see all three avenues being approached and being what, the boot that hits the ground first. So actually, I thought we were going to swing more towards before you propose that question. I thought we were going to move more towards probably the only positive thing we're going to talk about today, which is what we talked about and what we thought the whole the conversation of the whole year was going to be about. But I do want to hear your thoughts on where you think things are headed, at least before we dive real deep.
I think the New York Rangers, you talked about putting players in uncomfortable positions. I think management has done, especially, this last this season, even towards the end of last year, I think management has done a terrible job, with acquisitions, structure of this team. And I think after, last season, I think that Blake Wheeler esque approach of, just where we want to slot a guy in and hopefully it'll work with Mika and hopefully we pick the right guy and we go with Riley Smith. And I don't think Riley Smith has been that bad, but I think that approach is just not going to work. And I think, that falls on the management to not knowing their players. And I think, we're realizing that as fans now. But again, we don't see everything within the four walls of MSG, and we don't know what relationships and chemistry is like. And I think now seeing it, I think we've done a terrible job, up to this point. And I think kind of my last thought on Truba was, yes, that's good long term. But again, look at what that does, to you this year. That creates an even bigger hole. And throw in there Keandre Miller being out with an injury. And by the way, quick note on Miller. I mean, we can jump into this later, but I mean, Miller was toast 2 weeks into the season. I mean, he's been so bad. You could you could blame it on injuries, but I mean, last playoffs he's been bad too. So I mean, when whatever his contract is done up next, I mean, we need to have a big talk about that. But I
That's this
mean,
summer.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, I thought it was the summer, but I wasn't sure if we had one more year left on him. But yeah, I mean, it just you get rid of Truba, but that's not solving any sort of issue that this team is currently having right now. I mean, you trade Truba, and you haven't picked up back-to-back wins since trading him. It's been loss after loss after loss. And I remember speaking to you. We spoke. Um, uh, you know. I think it was after Truba, and I said, you know what, we got a little bit of a favorable schedule here. We're playing the Blackhawks, Kings we could beat, Blues. I mean, these are teams we should be able to beat. Bah, dead wrong. I mean, these are teams. I mean, when you can't beat the last place Chicago Blackhawks, I mean, you have a problem. You have a problem, and I got 1,000 problems. Or they I could sit here and point to this team right now.
They're not the worst team, and that's the worst part. The Rangers play Nashville, who is the worst team. And I've seen conversation Jim Cerny was talking about online for over blue shirts, like they're not the worst team, but I do think with the expectation of the Rangers they are, because I think it's clear now that if you win the offseason like Nashville did, it doesn't mean anything anymore. Whereas the Rangers were like expected to be a cup favorite. Now with that, Steve-O's going kind of all over. I'm trying to bring him back in, bringing him back in. So I thought honestly we were going to segue into Igor because I thought that was the great news, but we're going to push that down the road for a moment because you brought up management and I disagree.
Let's
And
hear
I
it.
disagree because I think for the great that Gordon and JD left, and we talked about the history of this on the last episode, like, close to a month ago, but I do feel that he had to inherit contracts that I don't think Chris Drury, I don't know if he would have traded for Jacob Trouba. Like, and again, this is all hypothetical, so that's different. We're talking about the moves that were actually made, but was he not going to sign Adam Fox? Was he not going to sign Vincent Trocheck? He didn't sign Chris Kreider, but I still think that's a good deal. And a lot of his successes have been off of Kreider's second half, latter successes on that contract. Zibanejad is the one deal that sticks out to me that he inked. Um, and even at that time, do you blame the man for signing a player that scored 41 goals as a 1C? I don't at the time. Right now, it looks terrible. I think what's tough is that the Rangers are like the roster construction. It's funny because we talked about this, 2 seasons ago after they lost to New Jersey. The criticism was speed. And now some of the criticism is physicality. And I think that's where I'm starting to have an issue is you move Jacob Truba, you took that out of the lineup. And whether you thought he was playing horrendous defense or not, that is a factor. So yeah, I think also with the trade deadlines, I thought he did the best that he could. But I mean, I love I don't know necessarily if this is the right place to debate, trade deadline acquisitions or not, but I do think that he's tried his best. I mean, the title, our headline right now is tampering. And the reason for that is because I think Drury has found these incredible back doors to move players. He did something that most general managers in the league would not. And that's either what's driven us to this point or he did the right thing. And results may be the only way that show that. He threatened Jacob Trouba, the captain of the team. I'll waive you if you don't. go down, if you don't accept the trade partner. Could you imagine? It wouldn't happen, but could you imagine if Kreider, Zibanejad, or Truba ever got sent down to Hartford? That would ruin their career. I mean, I think it would visually and optically damage their image around the NHL, and not only theirs, but also Chris Drury's. I don't think I think he played a really risky card there. Then the news from multiple sources, according to Brooks on Chicklets, Brady Tkachuk. Then it was again Brady Tkachuk. Then it was again Brady Tkachuk. And then the Senators owner comes out and says, there was no conversation, whether there was or not, which I would assume there likely was, or rumblings. This is a
Definitely.
manager that's also and an owner that's trying to protect his franchise. He's trying to keep the one reason that fans are coming to the games in the building and also their best player. So I think there's been a lot that Drury has done that toes that line. And I actually think he's done a very good job. It's just very cold.
I see what you're saying, and I to an extent I do agree with you. I think, how about this? What I disagree with in terms of, and I think Jury's done a lot of good things, especially when piecing together that 22, especially 23 too. Again, and it was just happened to be player performances that didn't come out. But I do think New York, the front office is a little bit to blame with this expectation of an open season, where I necessarily coming out and saying Kreider's on the block or everybody's on the block, and
That was a bad move.
I think that was a really bad move. And Truba said it in his with his I think it was his first presser with Anaheim. He said, it got to him mentally, and when you hear him say that and you look at guys like Mika, and how about let's talk about some other guys. Kreider hasn't scored a goal in over 5 games. Vinny T has been quiet to the bone recently. You got to think that, even with guys that are, we know they're not going anywhere, you got to think that, when your front office is coming out and saying these things, that this is affecting you totally. And I think Mika is the prime example of this. You want to discuss it, keep it in house, that's totally fine. But when it's out there, and not even that, but then you have reporters, uh, you know, people inside the locker room asking, after every game and during practice, this idea of, like, what are you feeling that, that this team's on shakeup right now. I think that was that was just bad to put that out there. And that I put on the Rangers front office for doing that. And I think right now, this will lead us into another question later on. But I mean, the confidence in this locker room right now is totally shot. And I think, you
Oh, yeah.
know, when looking at this team, I wanted to mention this earlier on. You made a good point about, Jury and moving forward with after I think it was a 23 team. You know, I I don't think we're there at a rebuild status yet. And you look at this team won. How many teams do you look at and say, you know what, they won the President's Trophy, they were the best team in hockey, and the next year we're gonna blow it up? I can't tell you that that's ever happened in my entire lifetime. And I think when you look at Panarin and Trocheck and Mika and Kreider, and defensively on paper, it's a solid defense. We're solid in the decor on paper. And, I still think we have that fight in us. And just to see it be, I mean, we look like, I said it earlier in the episode, we look like a JV hockey team. I mean, we look like the San Jose Sharks last year in January. I mean, we look like we're eliminated. We have zero confidence. And it's such a tough spot. Where do you go? And it's so frustrating. I could sit here and, we could talk. I do want to talk about some of the things that are wrong with this team right now. And I think, mainly all of them. And there's one thing that's plaguing us. But it's just a head scratcher, man. Like, this team could be so much better. And you look at the secondary role players, somebody like a Will Cooley, for example. Kako too. We'll get to him. I think Kako's been playing decently. And you look at the
Actually, wait, Steve-O, hold that thought because I have a question for you on Kako,
right.
and I'm tying it back. I'm bringing you back. I'm reeling you back in. I feel like we're on a fishing boat together. The question of are the NYR done yet was completely exacerbated when Kako was a healthy scratch. Do you think that was just a move, again, to take a player out of the lineup and get a better look at Berard, get VC into a game, kind of shake up the lineup, again, try and deliver the little bit of that like pulse shake up? Or do you think that we may not see Kako playing another game as a Ranger?
Listen, I think that, you know, scratching Kako, at this point, if it's not a trade, I think scratching him made no sense. Again, you're not getting better from scratching him. What did that change? Absolutely nothing. I mean, it would be understandable if he was unwell or if he was sick or if he was injured. But I mean, leaving Kako out of the lineup to send a message is so confusing because that just tells us that Lavi is so desperate, and he is. Let's be honest. I mean, there's no sugarcoating it. I mean, this team has been terrible. He's got to do some. He might be on the hot seat. More on that later. But I mean, scratching Kako just made no sense. I think his line with Cooley and Heedle, they've been a bright spot, on this roster. Look at the last 10 games,
Easily the Rangers' best line.
they've literally been the Rangers' best line. You're totally right on that, Marks. And, I think there was just better ways to handle the situation, but the Rangers, travel down this rocky road. When it comes to resolution, we'll get more insight, on the next few days if Kako comes back and he plays against Nashville or Dallas, or if he ends up getting traded. But you know, it remains to be seen if he's going to be reinserted in the lineup or if he's going to be on a new team. For me, I think he's going to be reinserted in the lineup. But I mean, scratching him to get something going to me just makes no sense. And again, you could go out there and trade him. I don't know the return you're going to get on him right now. But I mean, let's say, we trade Kako, similar to the return we got on Truba. The Trouba move was more of a financial move. I don't think Kako you're going to be saving a ton, and you're still going to have a problem. And I don't think trading him, even on his 1 year deal, I don't think trading him does anything because you're going to mess with Cooley now. He's been playing. He's been the one player that's been playing well. So it's very clear that I don't think Laviolette's to blame on this. You could throw part blame on him, but it's very obvious that he's just trying to. I think he's trying to get something going. Unless you disagree with me and you think a trade is coming.
I want to circle back to what you said before because I kind of wasn't getting where you were going, and now I do. And it's about expectation, and it's where are we going? Where are we going? Gosh, it's like there's objective parts of me and logic where, like you just said, I 100% agree, right? Truba move, financial. But then there's parts that are troubling. And for me, it's facing the unknown. Are we going to thrust Cooley, Loff, and Heedle into the top of the lineup? And are we going to play Zibanejad 10 minutes a night until he requests a trade? Is that the next move? Because Friedman mentioned that on 32 Thoughts today. And I think he's been ahead of the curve on a lot of this. Brooks has been ahead of the curve on a lot of this. And if you listen to what they say in retrospect, it all ended up happening. The same as the tampering. That's going to be a huge conversation moving forward. I don't think Chris Drew is going to get away with. I waived Barkley Goodrow, and the San Jose Sharks picked him up instantly because they knew, if that makes sense. But again, what is the direction we're going? Because now Kako is sitting. So are we just gonna, force the veterans into playing until we lose the season? Or maybe turn it around? I think a shock is they started 10-4-1. Horrendous losing streak, 5-10. They are still 500. They are out of the playoffs, 1 point below the Ottawa Senators, who they were obviously in the news with last week too about Kachuk. But again, the Brady Kachuk rumor for a very long time was that Lafreniere had to be part of that deal. An executive told Arthur Staple last week, we posted this, Gabe Perreault, Victor Mancini, Alexi Lafreniere. They're not taking calls on Kreider. They're not taking calls on Zibanejad. So you can't move those players. And those bubble teams aren't going to take, like the Ducks are going to take a Trouba contract, but not every team is going to do that. Not only is not every team going to do that, bubble teams that maybe you could get some value because you look at Buffalo and you say, maybe we want Alex Tuck. He was a hot topic in New York all of last season. Well, are they going to trade for Chris Kreider, a player that is significantly older than Tuck, plays the same style of game? They're not because Kevin Adams just got grilled for his press conference last week. And Terry Pegula just met with the Sabres today and said, we're not making a big trade. We're not moving one of our guys out of our locker room. The Ottawa Senators are unwilling to part with Brady Kachuk. Now, these things are all possible. And something that Friedman always says is what is true today doesn't necessarily mean it's true tomorrow. And that's true as well. But I just don't see in the near future the Rangers finding trade partners like they have, where, like you said, is the goal to move Kako for Steven Stamkos, who, because Nashville is struggling, maybe they're going to want a young player in return and we're going to want a center? This is really a true theory. Brooks mentioned it the other day on Up in the Blue Seats. But like you said, Steve, are we going to start, selling some, the Tony Amonte for the Stefan Matteau? And are we going to try and go full tilt still to get us out of this? I don't understand where's the ship taking us because now it's December. You've made some really questionable and almost contradictory moves. And now, without Miller on the back end, you're playing some AHL guys full minutes, and then you're not playing Zibanejad. I don't know what the idea is, and I can't really think of this team doing a full teardown, but also I can't imagine going into a even a modern rebuild now.
Yeah, I'm so glad you got my point with with this
It clicked.
expectation because it's just the burning question because again, if this team there's two paths right now. This is the way I see it. And I still see, now it might be tough, but you know, you mentioned we're still 500. You win 3 games in a row, you're right back in that playoff conversation. I still think, we have one thing that a lot of teams don't have. And right now, that means absolutely nothing. But we have Igor Shesterkin. And this could be the perfect pivot into that. But at the end of the day, I'm still a big believer. As you just get in, you saw last year, Igor didn't have the best regular season.
Mhm.
I don't want to say and by no means did he carry us to the Eastern Conference Final. But what I'm saying is, let's say 3 years, or maybe not 3 years. Well, actually, who knows? But 5 years into his contract, we might not have a good Rangers team. But with Igor, if you get in, anything can happen because of what he's capable of. So let's talk about Igor. Let's be positive for a second. Why not?
I like that spin, Steve, and I really like what you just said because I think for how downtrodden things are in New York, and trust me, I don't think it's looking up. Like you and I have talked about this for a while. I'm usually optimistic. That LA Kings game pushed me over the edge. Like that was a tough watch. But Igor signing this deal, I think it was interesting. I think it maybe was a move that New York was like, the management. It's funny, we talked about the front office. I think they were like, all right, we just traded our captain. We need something good because we're not playing well. We trade our captain. The big lingering thing was about the best goaltender in the world. And frankly, there's been conversation about his contract. I think a lot of the ball knowers, in the media are dead accurate, and you and I share the same opinion. Colorado had to go and get Darcy Kemper, and they haven't had a consistent goaltender since. Tampa Bay had Andrei Vasilevsky, the best goaltender at the time, and they won 2 cups. You look at those teams. Sergei Bobrovsky just won the Stanley Cup. His contract looked like an albatross. He wasn't in the league. They were playing Spencer Knight over him. He wins his Stanley Cup. All of that washes away like a beautiful summer tide. I think if you have Aiden Hill is one of those other outliers. That was a conversation of like running back pitcher where it's like, do you just go with the guy for 2 years and just, recycle goaltenders and go with cheap contract? Okay. But none of those teams had the best goaltender in the world. Vegas did not have the best goaltender in the world on their roster. So the Rangers have the best goaltender in the world on their roster. They're going to retain him. They're not going to move him to try to recycle keepers to see if that's going to work. He's the best of the best. And like you said, he's been there every step of the way. None of the season is on him. And I think this was also a great chess move to find something positive to bring. And it kind of, immediately dampened that fire. It's like, all right, he's in New York for the long run. So, listen, he takes up the same percentage of the cap as Lundqvist did, and I think hopefully whoever's managing this team for the next number of years, it'll likely be a few different groups, can look at that Lundqvist era and see what they did wrong, right?
Yeah, I love that. That I think that's the point of the episode right there, you know. And again, this re-signing Shesterkin, you know, I said this all season long, you know, this had to get done. You know, I think we all knew this was going to get done at the end of the day. It was just going to be more of a number thing, and I think we made it work. You know, as a fan, I'm happy with it. I'm sure Igor right now will tell you he's happy with it. And my answer, you know, if we did, we sat here live, you know, right after uh, re-signing him, I would have told you this is great. We're removing that distraction for the remainder of the season, you know, and put a cherry on top. We're moving right along to next business. But now that you know we've seen you know what this team has been doing these last couple of weeks, you know, I mean, Igor is nowhere near you know the problem, you know, but I mean, Shesterkin is the Rangers. You know, he's the backbone of this team. He's the focal point of everything that this team does when it comes down to crunch time. And he's what matters the most, you know. And the Rangers have always been since I remember. The Rangers have always been relying on their goaltending, you know. And again, I hate saying that, you know, the Rangers will go as far as their goaltender will take them. But we saw, especially even last year against you know, Carolina in round two, we were kind of going stale, you know, after Panarin's game 3 winner, game 4 you lose, game 5 you lose. And then game 6 is not going your way. And Igor, time and time after again, you know, came up and made a big save. You know, even when the defense left him out to dry, especially in the Eastern Conference Finals. How about that? I think it was game 3 when Wenberg had the OT winner. You know, I didn't think we were going to win that game, but Igor, I mean, there was a span of like 10 minutes where he stood on his net and showed you that's why he is a New York Ranger and he's the best goalie in the NHL. So again, this was something that had to get done. Keeping him was not just wishful thinking, you know, it was a given the way this New York Rangers team is built, and they're obviously built around their goaltending. Right now, they're not built on defense, you know, and that's a big issue that we could jump to in a second. But again, the way this team is structured, um, pre blow up, after blow up, they're structured around goaltending. So again, Igor, that's the only thing we should be smiling about in the last month.
Yeah, I think it's funny because the roster conversation, like the roster build conversation and where you're putting it's a cap league, it's obviously I'm not going to invalidate those conversations, but it is funny because we've seen goaltenders paid a lot win and make the cup final, and we've seen goaltenders not get paid a lot and win and flame out of the NHL. So to me, it's like a kind of a relative conversation, you know? Does Stuart Skinner make the cup final if he's not on the same team as McDavid and Draisaitl? I don't know. Does Bobrovsky make it without some of the players that they had and some of those grittier players in front of him? I don't know. So, and listen, I don't think Lundqvist's best team in front of him was 13-14 by skill, talent, or anything else. I think it was the situation they had that year. So, yeah, overall, um, it ties a bow on that conversation, and I feel like it was so trite that you and I talked about that too. We beat it to a pulp. Now, our opinions on the last, I don't even know, is this even right? 3-7 still in last 10? I wrote this in a few days ago before the this weekend. Steve, I think, you started to veer into it before. The players that are playing better, Kako being scratched is questionable because he's been one of the better players. The standouts, Will Cooley. I think Panarin's up there. But other than that, this team is struggling. And like I said at the top of our show here, I don't know if like I personally don't want to engage in conversation with you about the minute details because the reality is it feels like these games keep coming and we keep losing. Like it feels like a very slippery slope. When you win, it feels like there's a lot of time between games and maybe some anticipation if you're competing. But when you lose, it feels like, I felt like the game and then the back to back between LA and St. Louis was too fast. It felt like there wasn't enough time to pump the brakes.
Yeah, and I think one thing that um oh, where do we start with this? First of all, I think we'll go with the obvious. I think the defense has just been horrible in all these games. You wanna look at the St. Louis game, you wanna look at the Chicago game, you wanna look at the Kings game. I mean, all these games were brutal to sit down and
Actually, Steve, I
watch.
have a question for you
Go ahead.
because we kind of alluded to it before, but the defense is bad. Do you think that, like, I think Braden Schneider was ready to take a step, and the conversation is that Vancouver, excuse me, when JT Miller was in the trade conversation, Vancouver reportedly wanted Braden Schneider, and the Rangers shut the deal down. So they see him as extremely valuable. I think he was ready to make the jump, but do you think that because of Miller's current injury situation and the move of Truba very rapidly forced play, like I don't think Mancini is ready or Jones is ready to take on the roles that they're in,
Yeah, definitely
which is
not.
added, you know what I mean? Like, which is added to the problem.
Exactly. I have to say, Mancini's been horrible, and I'm not saying that, he's I'm not blaming this on him. He's just not ready. The organization's putting him in a tough spot. But I mean, boy, on that Saturday game against the Kings, I mean, Mancini and Zach Jones were awful. I mean, they both finished. I mean, they had a -3, midway through the second period, and then you obviously see Mancini being a healthy scratch on Sunday. And Zach Jones has just not been playing well. He was Jones put himself in a horrible position on that Robert Thomas, 2-on-1 goal off the rush for the Blues. And again with Keandre Miller on IR and Truba gone, we are very thin on the blue line. I think it's just when you're this thin, and this goes back to when we had Truba and Miller. Everybody, including offensive players, have been terrible defensively. I mean, Vincent Trocheck and Mika in the defensive zone have been both terrible. I mean, it's like we forgot how to play defense. I mean, it's just, I really don't know. Again, it's hard for us to sit here and explain why is that, but to see, and there's only one person who I've seen play great in the defensive zone. And that's been Will Cooley, and he's been the only person that's been playing great. Everybody else, it's like they forgot how to play defense. I mean, Vinny against St. Louis was horrible defensively. I mean, the turnovers. I mean, it's just I can't sit here and fathom why that is. Another thing too is to start the games, we've been terrible. I mean, we've been giving up goals minute into games. I just don't know if it's every game you look at here, Chicago 1-0 early on, LA 1-0 early on, St. Louis
Yeah.
1-0 early on. I mean, teams are scoring a minute in. I mean, this is every single game. And the reason I wanted to bring up this expectation conversation is because all these factors that we're seeing, no defense, the lack of urgency, turnovers. These are things you see out of a team that is eliminated and has nothing to play for. And the fact that we're sitting here and we're seeing these things in December, against bad teams, doesn't matter if Chicago is the worst team or they're not the worst team, they're still a bad team. The Rangers should win 9-1 against this team. It doesn't matter. These things are so concerning. So I know I touched upon a lot there, defense and just the lack of urgency to start these games. But I'll let you jump in and attack this however you want.
Steven, I want you to speak your truth, man. Okay, that's why we're here. And I agree with you personally. There's a lot of fires. And it's funny because I came into this episode thinking there weren't any positives to look at. And you mentioned one, which was that you win 3 games in a row. And at least if you get out of the funk, even if you don't play great, but if you win, confidence is going to, like, that first win, I think is going to boost the team because guess what, folks? They're going to win a game. Okay. Whether it's too late or not, I'm not sure, but they're going to win eventually. And they're going to have to because the next games are a gauntlet. We're going to pull that up in a moment. But the reason I wanted to pull up Puckpedia, shout out Puckpedia, 19 million in cap space at the deadline this year. Now, once Chesterkin's contract comes into the fold, a little bit of a different story. But 19 million in cap space at the deadline allows you to look at defenders that maybe you don't look at for a full, you know, top starting 6 defender for, the next 8 years. It, I don't think the market's great this year, but you could try and make some moves to acquire players that were hard to play against, like Florida. And that conversation goes with expectation too. Valley said it a lot. The Rangers are not hard to play against. And teams that don't have a chance in hell, like Nashville, are looking at the Rangers like this is our chance. Buffalo, when you and I watched that game a month ago, they looked at their chance and they were like, you know what? Even at that time, they were looking at the Rangers and saying, there's holes. They aren't 10-4-1, if you know what I mean. So I think a lot of this keeps going back to the thesis statement for you and I. And obviously the recent games have been abysmal. But I also think something to think about is what's that feeling going to be like for the locker room when they win a close game? Because I'm going to pull up the schedule right now, Steve, and I want you to touch upon kind of just where your thoughts are for as we head into the new year, because it's going to get tough.
Yeah, let's certainly do that. But again, back to my point, it's the same recurring theme every game.
Hmm.
We are spending majority of the game chasing, rather than setting the tone ourselves. And it's just we're
You
depleted.
can't win games like that.
You can't. And I think you look at the theme, and again, everything is just the overall mood is trending down. And if the Rangers don't even make the playoffs, let alone be a first round exit, I would say, that's totally understandable. You read the tea leaves. Looking back at the last few years, when you read the tea leaves, you point to certain things and you say, you know what? I see why that happened, or I see why this happened. This year, we've been saying, we got a test right here coming up. We're playing Carolina. Didn't win that game. Played a game against New Jersey. Didn't win that game either. So all these games that are like, you know what? We're going to prove it. Not even that, but like I told you a couple weeks ago, we got a game against Chicago. We got a favorable schedule. We're not even winning these games, So I think
Yeah.
the tone here as we shift over to the next game, Preds game. Let's go game by game. Predators, this is you need this game. I mean, there's no way to say this. I mean, you have to right the ship. How about this? Even if you beat the Predators, that's not righting the ship, but it's starting to right the ship. It seems like this team. I still get the feel that this team is one goal away from awakening the sleeping giant, getting these guys going, and it hasn't panned out. And I think if there's one team that's been more disappointing than us right now, it's been the Nashville Predators, and I
Yeah.
think, I think the Predators make us look like an absolute juggernaut by comparison. I mean, they're by far the easiest. They're the easiest disappointment this season. You know, bringing in Stamkos and Marchessault and Shea and all these guys, and they've been absolute, crap. But unfortunately, again, I'm gonna point to this game. We played absolute crap in the Chicago Blackhawks and we lost. So, we don't really have that much talking room. But again, this is a game you have to have. You have to beat the Nashville Predators. If you don't beat this team, then I just think I laid it out in terms of expectations, and I think you just said it great. There's kind of this twofold path right now. This kind of just blow it up and enter the modern rebuild, or kind of maybe you go out there and you put a little wins together, and we go out there and Drury gets a trade piece, and you say, you know what, we might not say we're back, but we're gonna make a run at this. And I think these are the games you have to win. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I think the Rangers are in a tough spot though, because when we talk about like initiating something, like I just don't even know when that starts. Like, does it start right away? Do you make a move that instantly makes them better, or do you make a move for the future? Because frankly, they're too deep at left wing. We don't have enough centers. We clearly have defenders, but not enough NHL caliber defenders in the system. You have, like I said, too many left wingers. So it's like, well, do you start trading the prospects, the unknowns, the Gabe Perreault, the Brennan Othman? He's a right winger. Or do you trade a Chris Kreider, but then who's taking him? And I'm not saying that no one would want him in the NHL, but there's things to consider. The bubble teams right now still feel like they can compete for a playoff spot. Ottawa's in one right now. So although it's a thin margin, and if the Rangers win 3 of these games, they're right back in it. That's why things are tough because it's like, well, I'm not sure really who the trade partners would be, and obviously things changed drastically. I never thought the Ducks would pick up Trouba's full contract, but I don't see Drury hitting the lottery on all these moves all the time. Now, when we're talking about the games themselves, I think Nashville optically looks bad, but frankly, at this point, gosh, I don't even want to say this on a microphone. Where it gets worse is if someone like Phil Hedel suffers a severe injury. That's where to me things get bad. If Alexis Lafreniere is down for the year, that's where things get bad. But to me, optically, it would be a real kick in the pants if you lose to Nashville. But frankly, I I don't know. We've already, like you just mentioned, that they lost to Chicago. I felt that was a low. I felt like that was a low enough loss that you could say, well, you know what? We can lose to these teams right now. I'm not saying it's great, but we just went on and on about that Nashville game. But I think moving forward, where I'm concerned, I wish I could circle it on the screen, is Carolina and New Jersey. Because frankly, the Florida games, I don't have high expectations for right now. But good Lord, both Carolina and New Jersey are on a heater. And the Rangers already lost to them in the same week around Thanksgiving. And I felt like that really started to pile on the losing streak. Like the New Jersey loss was embarrassing, I think, for the organization on many levels.
Yeah, and I think what's worrying for me, and I agree with you, those two dates, 100%, I would circle them, is that it's back to back. And I think the one thing that is so hard for a team that is losing night in, night out, and nothing's going wrong for them is to lose and then the next day come out, and lose again. And I think it's not even like you get a nice little break, you see, from Nashville to Dallas, Tuesday to Friday. Maybe it's like, you know what? Let's take a breather. Let's get back to fundamentals and practice. Let's get Panarin back. Let's get our confidence up. Maybe you snag a game in Nashville, you get a nice little break. You saw this past weekend. You get absolutely trounced by the Kings, and then the next day after that, it's so hard to regroup when you take a beating like that and you lose. So that's the one thing that kind
And
of
your
just
two goal scorers are Berard and Cooley, who
I
were in
know,
the AHL last season
I
or
know,
two
and
seasons ago.
that's what makes me so upset and so depleted. what you just mentioned because if the Rangers had their dogs going, and Cooley, and some of these secondary players were playing well too, this Rangers team would be unstoppable, man.
Oh, that's what we've seen, man. This core, the entire run of this core is like up here and then down here. And it feels like the in between is the fallout.
I know. And listen, the Dallas game's going to be hard. Dallas is what? 12-2 in their last 14 games. I mean, they've been on a heater themselves. They're one of the best teams in the Western Conference. And then you get past Christmas, you got to go play Tampa and Boston and Florida and all these teams that, Boston's tough no matter, what they're going through. Tampa with Gensel's turning things around, it's just going to be hard on all cylinders. And do you see the light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, where does it start? Does it start in your eyes in a game against Nashville, or does it start with a win for one of those two teams in New Jersey and Carolina?
I won't chime in on that just because I feel like it's I don't I just feel like you and I don't gain much by talking about a future event that we don't know. Like it feels like against St. Louis, Panarin was out of the game. That automatically would have changed my opinions going into it. So I just feel like we don't know. I feel even recording this episode, you and I have not talked in almost a month. And it felt like every time we were going to record, there was something else that was on the horizon that we felt like, well, if we record, it's going to completely change what's next. So yeah, the
Exactly.
reason I don't want to comment on what game I feel like yeah, if they defeat any game that they win, if it's against Nashville or another opponent, it's a confidence build. It's going to take time, but then again, do they win those games? Because to me, I think the next question is about the man behind the bench, and I think with that we talk about the topic you've been wanting to talk about, Steve. Is Peter Laviolette on the hot seat? We've seen him throw the lines in the NutriBullet. We've seen him play players that were likely undeserving in the 6-on-5 situation. We've seen him not change the lineup. We've seen him change the lineup completely. He agreed to the Truba trade. He agreed with the Kako scratching. He was part of that conversation. At what point do you look overall and say, is this on the head coach? Because you and I detailed our thoughts on the general manager, and we've detailed our thoughts on the players over a long course of time. We've been talking about this since the summer. And I don't see, especially with the way the cap situation is and with the player contracts themselves, and honestly, how the locker room reacted to the Truba trade and the trade memo. I don't know if there's many options if they really want to radically change this team
Yeah,
right now.
I got two answers for you on that. You know,
Give them
hopefully,
to me.
hopefully you'll agree. I'm curious, but number one is Peter Laviolette on the hot seat. Absolutely, 100%, he's on the hot seat. I mean, again, the expectation of this team coming in, from where we were supposed to be. I mean, we were targeted to be one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, one of the favorites to get back to the Stanley Cup. And
Probably the two to Florida, right?
exactly, and the Devils. Um, and just to see the product on ice, the play has just been so poor. I mean, you watch some of these games. I don't know how much of a how many other games in the NHL you catch, but I mean, you flip on Sharks versus Colorado, and you see the Sharks outplaying Colorado. I mean, and you compare how we're playing, and we're compared to how another team that's lower on the totem pole than we are, and you say, wow, they might lose to Colorado, but they're playing really good. You don't get that sense from us right now. And I think, you
No,
know, I'll say, yes, he's on the hot seat. And yes, I absolutely think there is a strong chance that he loses his job if this continues 100%. However, I don't think this is all on him. Like you looked at player performances and you say, he's not get you're not getting anywhere with what's on the ice. I mean, you look at the defense has been horrible. I mean, he's been trying to make adjustments, but the problem is that the play and the performance has been so bad. I don't think there's any adjustment you can make to solve this, and that has been evidently clear in these last 10 games. And I think he's at the point where he's desperate. I don't even think he knows, what move to pull off, scratching Kako and all these other lineup adjustments. This takes me back to a conversation we had earlier on, and I'm not a fan of getting rid of head coaches mid-season, but I think if you fire Peter Laviolette, and I want you to jump in here, but my quick thought to wrap this up is that if you fire Peter Laviolette, you I don't see that equivalating to success. Lavi knows this team, at the end of the day. And I think, if we go into some sort of a rebuild, I don't think Laviolette is the coach or of the future, or he's not going to have the vision of what to do to, rebuild. I hate that word because I don't think we're I don't think we're near a rebuild, but it seems evident that we are in. It's inevitable. It is inevitable that we are headed towards some version of a rebuild. He's gonna go, and I think, if Laviolette goes, in 2 weeks, I don't. Who are you bringing in that's going to make a change? I don't see that. Our players are so freaking hard to play with. I think that's evidently clear. Whether it's Mika, whether it's Kreider, whether it's Panarin, these players are very stubborn. Going back to the Gallant and Panarin, beef. These players are stubborn, and I just don't see a coaching change coming in and changing the play of how bad it's been. And the other thing is that there's no reinforcements coming. It's not like so and so's out, so and so's out. It's just it's not going to get better. Aside from Keandre Miller coming back from injury, and before injury he was horrible. It's not going to get better unless you make a trade. So for me, is Peter Laviolette on the hot seat? Yes. Do I think he's going to get fired? Yes, I do think if this continues. Do I agree with it? No, I don't. What do you think?
Well, I think you said a lot of great stuff, Steve, but you are throwing at me the bucket of water, brother. I'm trying to figure out what I want to address first because you brought up so many things that I just have like thoughts to build on. One of them, when you think about Tampa, right? Obviously, John Cooper, generational head coach. But you think about the players, they've played with a lot of different players. And I want to just add to what you said and increase you because I really like your thought process on this. Panarin, Zibanejad, and Kreider are very difficult to play with. And what Steve means by this, because we've talked about this very often, I didn't really understand what you said. I was new ears to this idea. I don't think it's really been thrown around a lot either. You see in Colorado, Nathan McKinnon constantly changing line mates. Sidney Crosby has had hundreds of line mates, and he always finds a way to bring them up and actually make careers for them. You don't get the same feeling. It feels like Trocheck, they got kind of lucky that he worked with Panarin, right? He wasn't even the center they tried with him. They tried Hedel, who obviously worked because I think Hedel just happens to work with everybody. But I really like your thought process on that because I think that small piece in this massive, spider web, it does speak to what the coach can get out of the player, what the cap situation is. Like while the general manager is trying to work around these contracts, he's trying to fit players into a team that's kind of set in its ways. And with three-star players that are a little bit difficult to not to work with. I don't play with them, but you just get that sense that with the 3 billion wingers they've tried with Zibanejad and Kreider, there was one that clicked the most, and it was a deadline acquisition. And since then, nobody really. So I think that is something to be said, and I'd like to continue that discourse at a later time too, because I really like that idea. The other things you mentioned though are like I think logically he has to be the first fall guy because you can't have this record and it's not on him. But I also think there are small nuggets that are. And one of them is he was hired to structure this team, and this team is worse than they were at their worst under Galan. Like, even in that series against New Jersey, we saw this type of play in two games. Three, game four. But I also think that at the beginning of last season, something that I was constantly writing about and printing was the 1-3-1 implementation. And Keandre Miller talked about with me for a long time about it, about how it's not a system play, it's a read. And when the player's on the ice, we all read that, we go into that formation, and it's just when you see a specific play developing from the other team. They can't even read when players are in their own goal crease. Like that to me is structure. This team is softer, right? We know Panarin's not throwing. I mean, I actually give him credit. He throws the body a little bit more than some of the other players, but we know that they're not a team that can get to the inside of the ice. That's roster construction. We know about, the locker room leadership dynamic from all the reports. We know about all the things with the general manager that Drury's tried, what he has done in the past, what he's looking to do in the future. Frankly, we don't 100% know right now, but he does anything to get things done. The thing that I point to with Laviolette is that none of this is really on him. I really admire what he's done, but I do also think that the impetus of his hire, the Gerard Gallant fire and Laviolette hire, was to structure this team. And I just think if you look at all these games, it's hitting you right on the face. There's no structure. So, as much as I don't want to see that, I think he's the first fall guy because it's the only thing you can do. Like, it's going to take, if you wanted to try and push Zibanejad out of the Big Apple, that's going to take months. It's not just going to happen. The one move that you could do quickly is cut the cord on the head coach. And I wouldn't love that. And the reason why, and I thought about it before for a long time, the head coach that you probably would have hired was Chris Knobloch, who took the Edmonton Oilers to the Stanley Cup final. Kind of a day late and a dollar short with that move. And the other news today from Jeff Marek's show, The Sheet, was that they proposed maybe Joel Quenneville then is in that conversation. And then I go back to, then why didn't you fire? Why didn't you hire Joel Quenneville in the first place if that's where we're going? Again, complete hypothetical. Also, a little bit controversial. I personally we haven't spoken much about it. I don't feel comfortable talking about all the Quenneville stuff, but there's obviously that would come with a magnet too, and I just don't even know if that move is the best move. Like there's a lot to that, but I also think that I'm not 100% behind PL lately, and it's solely because he was brought in to bring structure.
Yeah, I listen. I hear what you're saying. I do agree to an extent. I think you're right on. You look historically what this team has done with their head coaches, and head coach has been the first, fall piece. Go back to Galan after the 2022 Eastern Conference Finals. I mean, so and I think Jury is not afraid to go out there and make a move. You touched on all the pieces. He's kind of a boss the way you framed him up when you're talking about him telling Truba this is how it's gonna go, or you're accepting
Or
it,
else.
or else. So I think the same thing goes to the boat. Same thing falls in line with Peter Laviolette. I just hope, and if we lose 6 out of the next 7 games. It's inevitable, snap
Oh
the
my gosh,
fingers. It's
that
coming.
would be a nuclear meltdown.
The thing is I can't say I'm worried about it. It's just I see it coming where jury makes a predetermined decision and says, you know what, I'm blowing this up midseason, and we kind of see the crumblings of this. We haven't fully gotten it, but he
All
might
right,
flip
you
it.
know what? Me and you've been wanting to talk for a while. We've done our best job of keeping this buttoned up. I'm blowing this up right now, all right? I'm blowing our conversation up like you're saying Chris Drew's going to. What does that mean though? Because everybody's saying that, but it's like, all right, if you want to get the best value, you have to trade. They're not going to trade Cooley at this point, but he I don't know. I think they're taking calls on everyone. First of all, they're taking calls on everyone, even Adam Fox. Larry Brooks proposed that, but I feel like he's a guy that slips that in because maybe he knows. And his no move clause doesn't start until he's 27. But Steve-O, to you, what does blow up midseason mean? Because I like what you're saying, but I also say, like, all right, so what are the moves? And I'm not saying like the players you'd acquire, but what players do you move? You can't move Zibanejad, and I don't know if you can move Panarin.
So obviously the first move would be firing Peter Laviolette. I think that would be the first move in a blow up. And then you turn and you look at Mika, and you really start to pound him. I know he's in extreme. His situation is extreme.
Okay, but hear me out.
I'm listening.
Do you think an NHL team, and then listen, I know I've kind of pancaked on this topic. A lot of the conversation, especially out of Canadian media, was that teams aren't going to want to deal with New York if they know this is how they're going to not only like just treat players, but not even on that soft side of like, oh, player treatment, but also like, are we going to deal a player there and then they're going to turn, the whole thing? Are teams going to be hesitant to deal with New York if that's the case? I mean, if they forced Barclay Goodrow out in July, Jacob Trouba out in December, and they're going to try their say the 10 minutes a night wasn't a one-time thing, and they're going to try and just force Mika out. And even though he is a full no move, don't you think that's gonna real like I feel like that's not, if you go from firing the head coach, that I think immediately puts Drury in hot water between having a third head coach in as many seasons and on top of it then forcing out a third player in 5 months. That would be crazy.
I listen. I agree with you 100%. The reason I bring this up is because I
Okay.
could see him doing this. I'm not saying that
Yeah, he's
we
got
need to
he's
do
got
this.
no he
Listen.
don't hold back.
Let me put it out there. I am 100% against that. 100% against that.
All right, so that's your opinion.
Yes. The reason I bring it up because I see that as a viable option as they might do that. I think jury. I see it in his playbook where if we lose 7 out of the next 9, he says he makes a predetermined decision and says, you know what, we're not winning with this team. I'm not giving up assets to acquire pieces to make a run. I'm establishing right now that we're not doing anything, and he fires Peter Laviolette, and you start to see some other pieces go. Maybe you see, as silly as it sounds, maybe you see, a Schneider move, and he starts throwing pieces
I
around.
don't think they're gonna move him.
I don't think they were moving either, but you don't know what you're gonna get with Drury. So listen, I disagree with it, but
Maybe you and I will have to create like a trade list for our next post online, like who we think would be the players that are on the block type thing. I think that'd be fun. But I don't want to necessarily get into that on the pod. But what I do want to talk about is like I do also like what you just proposed. Like if they lose a number of these next games, which could really happen, what does that say? Is it, you know, are we cook chat? Um, and what players again are then available? Because they clearly said they're open for business. They put the sign out at MSG, at the world's most famous. They put it on the door. So I don't know where that goes. And again, like I think if I feel like this gets like a really slippery slope if he fires Peter Laviolette because it's kind of the thing that feels like it's going to happen at some point, unless they like turn on a dime. But I also think Drury's in a lose-lose because whether he keeps him and they lose it out on the season, or he fires him I think Drury's seat starts to get warm. I think it really does. Now, something else too to point out is Brooks mentioned that how Dolan operates, which I thought was really interesting on the Chicklets episode that he was just on. And I think that the idea that Dolan just stormed into the building one day and wanted Quinn and Gorton and Davidson fired is actually not as true as Brooks at least reported on that episode. So I'd also like to know what the ownership thinks, because the perception from the outside is that Dolan's impatient, but it sounded like that was a very different situation. So I also think, which you and I have talked about for a while, I think Drury kind of saved his Tookus because he saw that JD and Gorton were fired, how they were. I think when they fired Gallant, and he had that argument with Gallant after game, I think it was 4, right in the locker room or like behind closed doors. I think that Drury sensed that, well, if we don't move Gallant, am I going to be on the hot seat? Like I do feel like everyone's looking over their shoulder right now, which obviously isn't helping the players. I don't think it's helping the you know lobby, and I don't think it's helping the management at all. Like I think there's a lot of lose-lose situations here.
Yeah, when you have such scenarios like that, nobody wins. The franchise doesn't win as a whole. And I think this is my expectation, or not my expectation, this is my perception of it. But to me, Dolan seems like he's a micromanager only when things are going bad. You can look at the Knicks, you can look at the Rangers. Look at the Rangers the last few seasons. President's Trophy 2023, 2022. Things are going right. You don't hear anything about him. Things going wrong, or even I would say maybe at the end of 2022 when he starts to get a little impatient or whatever. Look at the Knicks for all those years. Then that's when you start to see more things coming. And to me, I get that
But
sense.
I feel every other owner would do that in sports, though.
Actually, but Dolan is not your typical owner. You know, you look at all the other owners you have, in the NHL and the NFL. James Dolan is a very in his own sense is unique, and I think you can look at all the I'll call it off the court, off the ice stuff, with the dating stuff and all that nonsense and all the other his beef in the NBA with certain players. I think you could look at that, interpret it to your own perspective. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know him. I don't know what his role is with
It's
this
very under
team.
wraps, that's for sure. Like
Exactly. You
we
don't
don't know much.
like you see how Steinbrenner comes out, meets with the media. Steve Cohen comes out, meets with the media. 2, 3 times a year. You don't get that really from Dolan at all. You really don't know what he's thinking. And you know, if you look to what the rumblings have said in the past, especially more so with the Knicks, when things are going bad, that's when he steps up. And I think you're right. He does add, another layer of pressure on whoever his GM is. And I think Jury has a little bit more room than people, previously employed by Dolan have in the past right now. But I do think you're right. I do think he's feeling a little bit of the heat. And again, the first domino is going to be Peter Laviolette. So
Which is it's
I didn't have
you
this on
think
my
it's
bingo card or for early December coming into
no, I
this
don't
year.
think I can't believe the Rangers are not in a playoff spot in December. Um, I wanted to mention something. Oh, yeah. Kevin Adams comes out and talks. Buffalo Sabres GM. You th- I also think it's highly questionable that the New York Rangers have not addressed the media.
I think
Like
there's a
we haven't seen Chris Drury since training camp.
And I think that plays kind of to what I've been saying. I said in the last episode for sure, is that this team doesn't know what they're doing right now. I think it's very obvious. I think on the coaching perspective, they don't know what to do, and I think from a managerial perspective, they don't know what to do.
I don't blame him though.
Yeah, but again, to me, it's still
This is a very strange situation.
it is. It is. And I think
This isn't like, oh, one defender's playing bad.
I agree, and I think we need to take this game by game as of right now. I think this is literally game by game basis. News could break any moment. I feel like that's PL is out. And I really hope that's not the case because again, as such fans in my lifetime, this would probably be out of all the four major sports here in America, this would probably be one of the worst collapses of just how about this worst folding. This might be this is like punting the football before you get to fourth down. I mean, it's just crazy. So I think you're right. It's a tough position for Drury to be in. It's a tough position for Laviolette to be in, and unfortunately, Laviolette's the one that's under the microscope, and Drury's gonna have to pick up. The pieces that crumble. And who's gonna step up? Is Adam Fox gonna step up and start giving us performances like we seen, a couple years ago? Is Panarin gonna come back and turn to form? How about Phil Hedo? Is he going to step in? Where's Chris Kreider been? Where's Trocheck been? Is Loft going to take, the glimpse that we saw from him last year? There's a lot of things you could look to turn to, and we've gotten none of it. It all starts with fundamentals on defense, and I feel bad for Igor. And I feel bad for Sam. Last season, he's got to sit there and call this crap. It's sad, but I think that's where we're at. I think we take it game by game, and 2 weeks from now we could be there's two different roadways we could be talking about, and I really hope we avoid one roadway. We're not there, but we're close. We're close.
Yeah, I think because I mentioned before, well, do you blame them for like this situation? Like before the memo came out, there was reason for them to consider some trades. And there is truth to that. Like Kreider had no assists before the memo, and he still only has two even strength goals in December. And now the 10 goals is very pale to the goals per game mark that he's around this time of the year. At least the last few seasons, he's had 30 plus goals, close to 40. I thought, with the way he started the year, he could have had 50, and that just completely fell off. Now, I know that we just talked about, I just mentioned one specific player. It feels like that's how it's going for everyone. It's silly. I think confidence is going to play a role, but I also think what is scary and why this feels like such a free fall is because most of the time an organization kind of knows, all right, we got some bad contracts this summer. We might have to retool, take it a step back. Some teams, like Nashville, Trotz had a very clear plan. We're going to go all in. We have the money. And then if that doesn't work, we're going to go all out and we're going to rebuild. I think what is concerning is like you're saying, we keep talking about the direction of the team in December. That's a weird time to be talking about this. And the teams that have gone on actually to the Stanley Cup final that I could think of, that had a coaching change midseason, Edmonton Oilers, St. Louis Blues. But those teams, what was the expectation that year before? It wasn't the Stanley Cup. And I
Exactly.
think I do think expectation has a lot to do with this too. The Washington Capitals added some players and suddenly are one of the top teams in the NHL. And the players they added, Mangiapane, Ovechkin's going for the record. Kind of the beginning of the year was like, oh, they'll just try and get him to the record. They're a legitimate team this year. You know, I think I'm saying that expectation, I think, also played a huge factor. And I think there is something to be said about the pressure. And clearly the memo got to the locker room in a negative way because I think there was already this mounting pressure like, oh, don't talk to it. Don't talk. Get to the cup final, cup final, cup final. You're a championship contender. Why is everything not going so well? Why are your underlying numbers not going well? What? And I understand you choose to play in that market. It's New York, but I also think I think that did get to them. And there's been reports that, Zibanejad, he has thinner skin, and that's just how some people are. Kreider was, in the few times he spoke this season, very frustrated, especially down this recent stretch, but he's also not the type that is always talking. Um, there's a lot of factors with the players specifically, but overall, the expectation I think was heavy. You know, it's similar to if Toronto was a legitimate cup contender and it was like you were just at the doorstep of the championship and now the next season is that's all it's about. What do you think about that? Because I think a team like Carolina, it seemed like maybe the expectation was a little bit less coming into this year based on their offseason, and now they're doing better. They're exceeding that. And I thought when the Rangers were doing their best, it was when they were exceeding expectations, not trying to live up to them.
100% agree with that. And all the evidence in recent years fully backs up what you just said. This is a team 2022 didn't really have the expectation, oh, they're not there yet. Overperformed. 2023, go out and get Patrick Kane, get Tarasenko. This was a team that had major, major expectations. And look what happened. Came up very, very flat in terms of what the expectation was last year. Getting rid of Gallant, getting Laviolette. You know what? We don't know what the expectation is. We don't know what this team is going to give you. What do they give you? They give you being the best team in the league. So this year they come in. Expectation is high. You get to the Eastern Conference Final, and the expectation is to build off of it. And you come up. I the jury's still out on that because the year's not over yet. So I don't want to say what I was originally going to say, but I 100% agree with you. And God knows where we're going to end up in this. Hopefully, man, I just hope it works out. Listen, take it one game at a time. Start with Nashville, take a nice little break. And the Rangers have played well in Dallas. This is a hot Dallas team, but in recent memory, we've went down to Dallas and we've won some pretty compelling games against them. So I think you just take it one step at a time, and this is literally a day by day basis. The way the news might drop, who knows what's going to happen, So I do agree with you on that point.
Well, Steve, I hope the next time that we're on, there's nothing drastic. Uh, Obviously, I think looking at things objectively and professionally, you look at it and say, well, you can lay it out the best you can. But I think for you and I, we grew up fans. We're tuning in every night, and it is a hard watch. It is something that it feels like Groundhog's Day, turning on the TV, and that happened very quickly. So it is interesting that we got to this point. It seemed like at the time of the memo, maybe it was jumping the gun, but now it seems like, well, maybe this is what he wanted to do all along. And that was evident in the summer. So
Yeah.
we just crammed in about a month of crazy news. Like some of this stuff, Steve, that you and I talked about, whether it was the tampering that was brought up in the owners and general managers meeting, the Brady Kachuk trade, the waves, all those things, which I didn't even realize was more about the New York Rangers than any other team. Uh, Drury, the memo, trading Truba, Igor signing, these individual events and stories would be a team's entire season. And this has been in the last 2 weeks. So I'm glad you and I got through all of it. And I'm hoping that whatever's up ahead, we don't have to really refer to a lot of these anymore. But we shall see.
Yeah, and listen, this is not what us fans want at the end of the day. It's the complete opposite. And again, when you have an expectation, especially in New York, the lights are 1,000,000,000 times brighter than they are in any other city in this league. So they're brighter in New York, but hopefully, Ranger fans, better days are ahead. Hopefully, I can't knock on wood. I can't guarantee that 100%, but you got to think at some point that a win's gonna show up eventually. That's how bad we've been. But that'll wrap us up here on this episode of Puck Talk CS. We're back in the full mood, full swing in the just the thing. So hopefully the boys can turn it around. We'll be here weekly to break everything around for you. Hopefully we're not giving you breaking news that that somebody's biting the dust, but all that will be remain to be seen. As always, follow us on all of our socials at Puck Talk CS, the YouTube, the Gram, Twitter. We're full swing in this. I don't want to call it a meltdown, but we're breaking it down 100%. And always remember, even in times like this, it's just the luck of the puck.